Thanks for clicking on Wayne.com for this week's edition of Inside the Zone. It is Week 10, which means it is the first week of the playoffs. Justin Kinney of Optimum Performance Sports, as always, here to join us to gab about what we got going on. Just talk, coffee talk.
Just a couple of guys just relaxing and talking about football.
Talking about teenage boys, high school football. That seems weird, right? But let's talk a little bit about sectional play. And before that, I want to get your thoughts on the overall landscape. Because now we're in playoff time. 6A, 5A don't play this week, but if you look out there across Northeast Indiana, who of the teams that we have do you think has the best chance to make a run and play at Lucas Oil Stadium come Thanksgiving?
Well, I think Adams Central leads that charge. I think all of us are looking at 1A and how it's setting up as being an Adams Central versus Lutheran rematch in Class 1A if everything stays chalk. Like they say, those are the two most dominant teams in Class 1A. You can look at the stats, the standings, the Sagarin ratings. Everything points to those two as being the top teams in 1A. Norwell is that second team, but after we saw them fall last week against Columbia City, does that open up maybe some doubt on Norwell? I feel like the team we saw lose to Columbia City last week is going to have a hard time with a West Lafayette or a Chittard or an Oak Hill or somebody that they run into between now and winning the North. So if we're doing a tiered system, we're looking at Adams Central there at the top, Norwell fitting in there, and then how about number 1 ranked Snyder in Class 5A? Why not?
That was my question, is how do you feel about Snyder? Snyder-Dwenger is going to be our Highlight Zone game of the week a week from now, so we'll crunch that a little bit more next Monday. But when you talk about the Snyder Panthers, they have elevated themselves to number 1 and appear to continually improve every week as the options on offense seem to run the entire gamut now. They can pretty much do anything, whatever they want, and the defense is always as solid. Special teams is there as well.
We're saying the same thing that we keep saying week after week about Snyder, and it's not that we're not impressed. It's just they are so businesslike in their approach and so balanced on all three facets of the game. And you know, Luke Hoppert's playing tremendously well, but he's not putting up Jimmy Sullivan stats. We don't talk about it as much. Kamari Juarez is good, but he's not putting up Tay Johnson stats. And that three-headed monster in the backfield is really good, but it's not putting up Jonte Lambert stats. So we really look at this team as it continues to work through methodically and just dominate opponents in a very undominant fashion in terms of individual stats. And that's how Kurt Tippin would love it to happen. He's excited about this group. It's a very balanced, down-to-earth type group, and just going about it as its business. I don't even know if they celebrate wins at this point at Snyder because it's been such a business person approach.
And I think some of that is because a lot of those games are over at halftime. So guys aren't padding their stats, playing a third quarter, playing a fourth quarter like we've seen in games that are closer. Let's talk a little bit about the postseason, 4A through 1A this coming Friday night. And when you talk about interesting sectionals, to me, there's no more sectional that is as interesting, especially this week, as you're talking about 4A Sectional 19. This has a number of teams. You're talking about East Noble at Angola, Southside at Leo, New Haven at DeKalb, Columbia City at Wayne. A lot of arguments could be made for a lot of teams in this sectional. So how do you see this one playing out long term?
Long term is impossible to predict right now, really, when you look at this one. In Columbia City coming off that high that was winning the NE8 championship last week, dramatic fashion, being down 12 points in the fourth and coming back and winning. Huge week. Now the challenge for Brett Fox, and I'm sure he's been battling it all week, is turning the page and refocusing, because if they come out flat against Wayne, the Generals are perfectly capable of knocking off Columbia City. We've seen it in the recent past. Good teams at Leo, good teams at East Noble being knocked off in the playoffs by low-end SAC teams. And Wayne went through the battles of the SAC. They have a great running back, Lamarion Nelson. You give Christian Chimble time in the pocket to make plays, he's going to beat you. You lose Jacob Sharon to an injury, which is a big loss for Wayne. But overall, it's a talented group that if Columbia City overlooks, they're going to get burned and beat on Friday.
Yeah, I was talking to Sherwood Haydock earlier this week, and he was like, are we brilliant? You know we're 2-7, right? And I'm like, well, I mean, I watched the games. You guys aren't a typical 2-7 team. Yeah. They've taken their lumps as a 4A team in the SAC. They've had some injuries. Sharon's out, but some of the guys like Nehemiah Young are a big factor on both sides.
And he's back. He's been out.
Right. So they feel like, despite Sharon's injury, they're getting healthy at the right time and getting guys back. I mean, this is a game. Again, on paper, if you look across the state and you hadn't seen Wayne play, you'd think, ugh, why would this possibly be game of the week? But to me, this is such an intriguing matchup.
It is, and you can guarantee that Brett Fox loves the fact that they won the NE8, but is terrified now of coming off a win, coming off of a high for everybody, players, coaches, fans, the city of Columbia City. And now you have to refocus. You have to take a bunch of teenage boys and refocus them and say, hey, we got to focus, because it's easy to look at 2-7 and say, now we're good. We just beat the number 3 ranked team in Class 3A. We're going to roll a Wayne Generals team. That's not going to be the case if they don't come ready to play. And I think you look at that entire sectional field and say, man, you better be ready to play in this one from the jump, because week 10 it starts. There's any team that can beat any other team in that sectional.
Yeah, and when you look at the top half of the bracket, East Noble at Angola, Southside at Leo. Leo will be favored, but we've seen Southside pick them off in the postseason.
In the past, right?
Yeah, when they've had good teams. And also, you know, East Noble at Angola, it's intriguing to me because I feel like it's not necessarily a regional rivalry game. I know they don't play each other,
right?
But I don't know, it kind of has a feel of like a rivalry game, because a lot of pride will be on the line between these two teams, especially after Angola fell to Eastside in what was the de facto NECC championship last week.
I feel like these are two teams that are playing well, but we expected more. You looked at Angola last week and you felt, okay, big division champions, they're taking Eastside. This is where they prove that they're the best team in the NECC, and they get rolled. They lose by 21 points. And then East Noble, it's really much been one step forward, 2 steps back for them this season. A lot of that has to do with the amount of youth that they're playing.
Right.
And it's totally a rebuilding type year for East Noble, but it's still a good enough squad to go to Angola and win if Coach Thomas's team isn't ready. So this is one that we look at and say, maybe not necessarily the winner of this has a great chance of winning the sectional, but they're getting some confidence in winning this one. And you look at the favorites in this one, and you look at Columbia City, and you look at Leo. It's been a minute for Columbia City. It's been a minute for Leo. Can they hold serve and play in a sectional championship? They both have challenges between now and then.
I remember talking to East Noble's Luke Amstutz before the season. He says, I don't know how a regular season is going to go. We've got a lot of juniors, a lot of guys that haven't seen the field a lot because they had a couple of talented senior classes back to back. But he said, I think we're going to be playing our best football in the postseason, and that's when you're going to see this team's ceiling. So now is the time to turn it on, and I wouldn't bet against Luke Amstutz if you
I wouldn't touch
that kind of time to prepare. Now let's talk about 3A Sectional 27. Norwell at Heritage, Concordia at Woodland, Yorktown at Delta, Belmont at Garrett. Norwell at Heritage is the headliner in this one for me, but week 2, it got nasty in Ossian, 42-0. What makes this matchup a better matchup the second time around in your eyes, or is it even a better matchup this time?
I like to think it'll be a better matchup. I'm not sure. I think Norwell's going to be a very angry team after last Friday. I think there was a touch and air of overconfidence, borderline arrogance with Norwell last week. They had dominated everybody. They were just going to come in and do it with a challenger in Columbia City. They were looking forward to the postseason. They were going to roll through 1A. Here they go, or excuse me, 3A in the north. And it all came crumbling down last week. And they got punched in the mouth last week for the first time all season, and they didn't handle it too well. And now, how does Norwell bounce back? And I think their first victim could be on Friday.
If you're Heritage, though, you have to be feeling pretty good. Like,
definitely,
you know what the game plan is. You've seen these guys. Their regular season, once they beat South Adams and got that confidence, you can just tell with Kobe Meyer and some of the guys they have, they feel pretty good about the product that they've had on the football field. Their most wins in quite some time during the regular season.
It's a great season for Heritage, particularly with how it was even just a few short years ago. So for them to get a 6-win season and really get that program back on track, because for a long time, Heritage was a traditional team that we had to watch out for each and every year in the ACAC. And are they returning to that under Coach Kolkman? You hope to see it. Are they at the level of Norwell? No. Does that mean they can't compete? No, as long as they can come out and play some good football. If there's some carryover from Norwell from last Friday into this Friday and a slow start, definitely they could. But I think Heritage is, you never want to play Norwell in the postseason. I think they're playing him at the wrong time after what happened to the Knights last week.
The winner of Norwell at Heritage will face the winner of Concordia at Woodland. I actually think that's kind of a low-key, interesting matchup because you take a look at Woodland, and they've taken some strides this year with Mike Smith, 3rd season, and the quarterback play has been improved.
Snyder's been well.
And the win against Culver was impressive to me, 16-14. So they've been able to pull out some close games, which gives you some confidence if it does stay close. Concordia's had a rough go of it this season with Tim Manigal returning to the sideline, but you're talking about a team that's tested throughout the SAC season. So how do you see this one playing out?
Well, these are the games that traditionally each and every year when we look at the SAC and say, okay, you've taken your lumps in the regular season in the SAC. Now you show out against lesser opponents. And I think these are games that are indicative of where the SAC is at, because this is the final year where we don't have any conference games. So we're still open to question just how good is the SAC in some of these teams. So when we look at Concordia, that's a winnable game against Woodland, and they should be able to win that game. But Woodland's pretty solid as well, particularly offensively. We talked about that matchup with Wayne and Columbia City. That's a game that you look at and say, okay, traditionally a lower-end SAC team is able to win that game, but we'll see. So I think these are barometer games for the SAC. Yeah. We looked at this season and say, for me, I'm looking at a SAC that's down as opposed to traditional years. And you look at, Homestead underperforming and DeWanger underperforming and Bishop Luers underperforming traditionally. But the Luers, the Concordias, the Waynes, they get into the playoffs and that changes, right? So that's a game that in particular I'm watching. Concordia should win that football game, but don't look past Woodland.
Yeah, for sure. 2A Sectional 35, Prairie Heights at Bishop Luers, Churubusco at Central Noble, Eastside at Wabash, Manchester at Whitko. Eastside is going to be a big favorite against Wabash. They're the team I think to look for on the bottom half of that bracket. Manchester and Whitko struggling this season. Wabash has a new coach this season in Coach Carmichael. Whereas in the top half, Bishop Luers heavily favored, I would guess, against Prairie Heights. Churubusco at Central Noble. Busco beat them pretty handily not too long ago in the regular season. Between Bishop Luers and Eastside is how a lot of people are going to see this one. But I think Busco's kind of a sneaky, solid football team, especially if you have to play them at their place.
It will be very interesting to see the weather a week from Friday, I think, because when we have the Bishop Luers Churubusco matchup, if it's like Monday night where it was just, hell outside and it was snowy and muddy and all that, then it's advantage Churubusco. But I think we're all looking at this sectional and saying, okay, it's Bishop Luers and Eastside round 4 coming up in a couple weeks. If anything outside of that happens, I think it'll be the biggest surprise in any sectional, because we're looking at this field and really pointing out the two teams that are really good. Churubusco, very good, but unfortunately they just don't match up well with Bishop Luers unless they can get into like a grinded out defensive slugfest. That's advantage Eagles. But when you look at this field, you're looking at Luers Eastside round 4.
How does Bishop Luers flip the script? How do they go into the, they didn't, they played well at times during the regular season, but as you mentioned, a little bit disappointing. We like to see a little bit them competitive against some of the SAC elite teams, and that didn't necessarily happen during the regular season. So how do they flip the script and say, okay, man, 2A, whenever we get in the 2A playoffs after playing in the SEC, we own this one. So how do they go about flipping the script and being ready to make a run deep into the postseason?
It's all about mindset for Bishop Luers, because we've seen them do it in the recent past where they've gone 500, under 500 in the SAC, and then been able to have significant success in the playoffs and go deep. It's all about where that mindset is. Is this a beaten team? Is this a emotionally beaten down, injuries mounting type team? Or is it a team that says, hey, we're hitting refresh, 0-0, go in to play some like-sized teams, and they can succeed? It's all about where those kids' minds are. Kyle Lindsey and his staff can only do so much. It's all about the impact of where those guys are at in the locker room. And I think if they are confident, if they feel like they go into this and they're the best 2A team in this sectional, then they're going to have some success. If they come into it as we're already a half-beaten team and really struggled over the course of the season and we're just playing the string out, then it's going to be a short postseason. So where are the minds of Bishop Luers players heading into this week and beyond?
Final sectional we're going to touch on today, 1A, Sectional 44. You got Fremont at South Adams, Adams Central at Southwood, North Miami at Madison Grant, Northfield at Southern Wells. Let's talk about the top half.
Sure.
Fremont at South Adams, Adams Central at Southwood. Adams Central at Southwood's kind of the premier game as far as 1A football goes in our area. You're talking about a Southwood team that's riding high. Last week, they beat an undefeated Tippecanoe Valley team. Tippy Valley missed a field goal at the end, 28-26. So Southwood earns a share of the TRC. We know what Adams Central's done in the ACAC, just run through people this year. So 2 conference champs going head-to-head. How do you see this one playing out at Sherman Wagner Field on Friday?
Man, Southwood's had a really good year, and you feel really solid if you're the Knights, and unfortunately the draw is you get Adams Central off the jump. And I feel like if you're Southwood, if you can attack and go vertical, then you can take away maybe some of the advantages that Adams Central has. But in this one, you feel, man, it's going to be extremely difficult to play with the Flying Jets. I mentioned it at the jump. If there's any sectional or class that we feel pretty good about a local team, it's Adams Central and in 1A in the North. And I know Southwood is good. They're just not at Adams Central's level. They need the Flying Jets to look past them a little bit, make some mistakes, short fields, give them an opportunity. But AC has just been rolling opponents through the first half. We talk about teams that aren't playing a complete 4 quarters. Coach Moser's team hasn't had to do it more than once or twice this season.
Right. That was kind of my next question, as you alluded to it. How do you make sure you're not looking past this? Because the Starfires and the Jets have a great rivalry. Right. They played in Week 6. Adams Central handled that one with relative ease.
Yeah.
But I imagine they're looking forward to playing a second time, this time at Minnick Field. So how do you make sure that Adams Central is prepared in Week 1 to play this week and to play 6 games when it's all said and done in the postseason?
That's the huge thing. That's the huge unknown for any coach is, man, how are these kids going to react to these situations? Are they overconfident? I think Norwell learned that lesson last week, helped them refocus. But where is AC's mind? I think for them it helps them reaching state last year and approaching it as unfinished business, and that's their goal. But they can't afford to look past Southwood. They can't afford to look past Southwood to look at South Adams and so on and so forth. So for them, one game at a time, cliche, but it's the biggest unknown for high school head coaches. It terrifies them to where is these kids' mindset going to be on Friday nights.
Final question, what are you most looking forward to here about Week 10, getting the postseason rolling? I imagine, every game is win or go home, so what are you most looking forward to?
Let's get it started. I think the Sectional 19 is fascinating when you look at it. I think when you look at these matchups with Columbia City and Wayne, East Noble and Angola is exciting. And I think basketball coaches are the most excited because starting next week, they'll have some kids. Once the football season wraps up with some of these schools, they'll be on the hardwood.
They want to get their guys back.
Get the guys back healthy, right? Every time they go down on the ground here late in the season, they hold their breath. But I think for some basketball coaches, they'll start seeing some of these kids start next week.
All right. Well, that does it for this week's edition of Inside the Zone. For Justin, I'm Glenn, and we'll see you back here on Monday to talk sectional semifinals.